Hello, class. This is a little more in-depth review of some broadcasting terms. Now, first, I want to review some of the key players we see in the news. Now, the main person you'll see whenever you're watching TV news, or if you're listening to the news on the radio, or even if you're listening on a podcast, is going to be someone we call the anchor. The anchor is the main newscaster presenting stories. They're normally in the studio or at the desk. And a lot of times you'll see them also if there's kind of a couch interview set up on a show. You'll also see reporters or MMJs, multimedia journalists. The majority of broadcast journalists are required to be multimedia journalists. That means someone who publishes their own work online. They also need to shoot their own video, record their own audio, make any social media or web posts required by their corporation, and of course shoot some still photos that can or capture them from their video that can be used online. Now, those people are usually the ones who are in contact with the community the most. Reporters are the ones who go out on beats and they talk to people or officials on the street and will usually handle any sort of breaking news coverage that happens in a particular area. Producers are more of a behind the scenes group. They are usually collecting and writing news stories for broadcast. Most of the newscast is usually written by a producer. Sometimes, depending on the station requirements, a producer may also be an anchor. So, especially for smaller stations or a weekend broadcast, you'll actually see the producer as an anchor on TV. Sometimes for morning shows or smaller stations, they'll also, instead of having the producer as an anchor, they may have them as a another multimedia journalist on the side. So after they finish whatever their producer duties are, they'll go out and collect information for stories to write for online, or maybe they'll front something themselves. Now, the news desk is a little different. News desk people are usually the ones who are receiving most of the phone calls. They'll distribute stories to different reporters or producers and kind of help coordinate a lot of the information that comes into the newsroom. And sometimes the news desk will also include advertising members or social media coordinators. And those people will handle any sponsored content that needs to go on air or maybe on the website. And a news desk will also, of course, include a news director. And the news director is usually the final person who decides whether or not a story goes on air or if it's going to be covered. The Generally they do take into account whatever the producers or anchors or reporters say about a project. Like if it's something they feel needs more time, then generally speaking, news directors will take that into consideration. Now, of course, all of these people work together to create a modern news team. And another person, of course, is the meteorologist or the weather person. They generally have their kind of their own spot where they do things, but for the most part, everybody works on the team together to create each show. Now, there are a lot of different formats for newscasts. There are some shorter versions. A lot of times before the 5, 6, or 10 o'clock news, you'll see something called headlines, where the key stories for that broadcast will appear. And normally it'll just show, they'll mention like one or two lines from the story to try and entice the audience. They want to make sure that you stick around for the whole broadcast, and because you saw these, stories earlier at the beginning of the show. Now, there is another version of headlines, which I'm going to show you here. Headlines can also be, so this is actually toward the end of a morning show broadcast where they're talking about the top stories of the morning, and they'll let's watch and see how they review this information. Okay. So, first of all, we started off with a monitor shot with our news anchor, and they introduce the headline segment by saying, here are today's top headlines. And they have the station logo as well. Now, a cool thing about monitors is you can change them to have video or logos or whatever it is you need for your headline or for whatever story you're covering. Now, we can see this video includes information from the governor's press conference, and then also, since it's related to the Pfizer vaccine, some stock footage of the Pfizer vaccine and it being administered. So this information is all available to the audience at the time of broadcast. And let's see what else they do. Okay, so they had a lead in to this, saw it from the sound on tape from the governor. And it basically says exactly what the governor is saying, except it does it in using different phrasing and helps to introduce the concept in the direct quote. Okay, so they finished that story and they moved straight into additional information about the COVID-19 vaccines using a graphic. Now, this graphic relates to the percent vaccinated in Acadiana, and it offers the main information from the story showing percent of those vaccinated, how many in the total population, highest rate area, and the lowest rate area. Okay, so that transition is called a stinger. It's a way to move between stories without it being too jarring, but it also alerts the audience to, oh, hey, there's something happening tomorrow that I may or may not want to know. And as we'll see, so it's more vaccine information. Since both of those graphics are very similar, this one and the previous one, you can use those transitions to kind of differentiate the information and help alert the audience that, hey, this is a new story. This is some new stuff you may want to know. And they're telling you where it's happening, when it's happening, and where you can find more information. Now, the transition you just saw is at KATC, they call it a 3-wipe. It's another just form of transition that we can do in between each segment, and it helps to move the story along and keep it from being too jarring whenever we move between stories. Another option, of course, would have been coming out on camera so we could see the anchor again, and that would be another form of transition. Most of the time, depending on what story format you have, you might not want to have the anchor appear on screen. Like for this one, since it's headlines and these are supposed to be kind of short news stories altogether until you come back on camera to switch to weather, they use the wipe in between stories, and that way we could move on to other Lafayette business related story information. Now, you can see this footage is from one of the events that already happened. They want to alert people to this information, and you can see they have even though this story already happened, there's another meeting set for March 31st. So what they do is you use the super, this little lower third element where you say what's happening. So Acadiana Planning Commission holds hearing on future of transportation. And then underneath it says next meeting set for March 31st at the Karen Crow Community Center. So we know what's happening and where and when it is happening. And we also have this close up of the map where people can see what area is affected in case this is where they live. Now you can also have a transition without actually using any kind of wipe or anything in between. Now the lower third we saw just now was a little different than the other one. So where we have a header that says it's national news. So usually if there's international or national news, or if there's whenever you have a lot of COVID stories together, or other things that are all related to one another, you'll use this 3-part super. And the top part says, okay, it's national news. Middle still explains what's happening, and the bottom says where it's happening. Okay, so for this version, they didn't do sometimes you'll have a split screen in between weather and the headline information with where they'll show both the news anchor and the meteorologist at the same time. But you get the idea. So we went over all of the headline information for that day. Now here's another version of the monitor shot. This is a 2-person monitor. You'll use these a lot of times whenever you have a really big story where you need some kind of dialogue to happen on set. Like maybe you'll have two meteorologists together, or you'll have a meteorologist, and another person who's covered a lot of weather stories before, or just to provide a little different scenario. It helps them to offer longer reads or any kind of breaking news coverage that might need more than one person on set. And as you can see, they also have that 3-part super here as well. They're tracking Hurricane Laura, and then of course their information here says they're talking about the latest on Hurricane Laura and impacting Louisiana. Okay, yeah, and as we said, graphic on the bottom of the screen is called a super or a lower third, and offers all of the most essential information, anything someone just tuning in might need in order to understand what the story is right now on the TV station. Now, an OTS shot is short for over the shoulder. It's an acronym for a camera shot where you have a person like we see here. It's usually going to be on the set as well. Not what it stands for, just they generally happen on the set, not in any sort of on the scene coverage, where you'll have the anchor and then you'll have some kind of floating graphic next to them on the screen. And the graphics change based on whatever story is being discussed. And this was back when we could actually have a Coors sponsor. Okay. So he's talking about Beirut and about the peacekeeping forces in the area. And as we hear, he's discussing U.S. involvement in Beirut and in Lebanon. So they're using this over the shoulder graphic related to that information. So we have the flags of the countries involved, and then we also have a tiny map of the area. Now, nowadays, you'd almost definitely have some kind of video from the incident. Okay. So at this particular time, apparently they not only changed the over the shoulder graphic, but it actually changed the color of the entire background as well. They were all on blue screens at the time, and they're talking about intense snowfall in another part of the country. And of course, they introduce the information and then move into what happened, how many people were injured or killed. Same kind of format really as the last story. So again, we change the background, the over the shoulder. Everything is related to the story discussed by the anchor. Okay. Nowadays, whenever a reporter creates a longer form report, so something longer than a VO SOT, then it'll usually incorporate some kind of stand-up as well. This can be breaking news, like live on the scene type of stand-ups, or especially whenever they create package reports usually incorporate video as well as narration, and they'll have direct quotes from different people. And they'll also have these stand-ups either in the beginning, middle, or end, sometimes in more than one place if it's necessary for the story. Now let's take a look at how she introduces this report. Okay, so she does a really great job introducing her story idea. She's talking about and the upcoming. Okay. See, so what she did is she said this the new airport terminal is about to open. Okay, great. That's something the audience needs to know. She also has information saying, hey, without actually addressing the audience in a you asked us about this type of way. She says the the old one was easier for people to drive to, but let me show you how to get there and I'll go over it with you so you don't feel as anxious about this new airport terminal. Okay, so she she set up her camera on the dash and shows exactly what the audience would see whenever they are whenever they're going to the airport. Now, she has some kind of stock footage here also, probably some that she shot herself, I would think, since a lot of times the kind of general stock footage needs to be updated, or it'll you have some that's seasonally related as well, like when you have a lot of stories about Christmas travel or Thanksgiving travel or what have you. Now, so she goes not just from showing video of how to go to the airport or how it looks inside in security and everything. She also has this great graphic where she explains the parking options available for people at the new airport terminal. And then, of course, how you can travel between the parking available and the airport itself. Okay, and I think she doesn't really have any additional stand-ups or anything on it. Yeah. So that last part, she probably had some kind of transition into back into the studio involved with the end of her package. So in her case, she put her stand up at the beginning as a way to introduce the topic to her audience. Sometimes you'll see reporters who include a stand up in the middle, or they'll maybe close it out with one. Or if you have one involved in a live shot, then you'll maybe have some VO with you offering information, and then you'll come back on camera to offer any updates for breaking news or what have you. Now, a tag is additional information a reporter adds on camera before concluding their package. Sometimes they'll use it with their sign off or sig out. So they'll offer um, they'll offer information about. Okay, so with this one, this was a 2 anchor read into the package. Usually you'll do this with longer introductions. Okay, so as you can see, she's going straight into a VO read for the beginning of her package. And then she has some kind of video graphic stuff happening. And then part of her interview on Zoom. So she did this. She apparently she felt this was a better approach to help include direct quotes from her source. Yeah. So she probably had a lot of short answers from this particular person, and it didn't really make sense for her to have the person by themselves on camera. It was a lot easier to have both of them there, and it made the information a little more approachable. Okay, so she does that. She has some more video and graphics and things. Okay, and you. Sorry, we got it, guys. Okay. Okay. So instead of giving a station ID for her SIG out, she gave her segment as the ID. She said, for Weight Loss Wednesdays, I'm Meg Ferris. And sometimes you'll see those too with stories where they maybe it's syndicated to multiple stations, and it makes it a little easier to create those kind of syndicated packages if you don't include the station ID. But generally speaking, a SIG out will include a location and what station you work for. Graphics, as we saw in headlines, graphics are usually going to consist of some information you want to highlight from a story. It might also include still images. This could be mugshots. It might be if there was a really big drug bust or something. They don't necessarily have video, but they'll send pictures of what was confiscated. Or if you have a traffic story update, you might have a map instead of a video of the area, um, to explain, hey, this is the area affected by this story. Or you may also have obituary information. They'll often include both a picture and graphics, well, a picture and information on the side of it for anyone who wants to attend. Nat sounds are sounds, they're natural sounds that are recorded usually for TV or radio. They're included in a story to help illustrate what's happening and to make more of an impact. It's especially relevant whenever you have stories like this where there's a sewer rupture, and not only are we getting the visual of the water coming out of the ground, but we can actually hear it as it's pouring over the street. So this is an example of a VO monitor introduction. And of course, they sent their MMJ to the gross flooded sewer mentioned by the anchor. And he created a package report ahead of time. And obviously, whenever you're live, whatever sound is happening around you, it's going to be there because there's no way around it. Okay, so she tossed to him and he tossed to his package report. Now, as you can see, well, of course, they left the audio there, but they also leave it in some other parts where they're showing the water coming out of the ground and just pouring everywhere. And it makes a much greater impact on the audience to hear and see this type of issue. Now, one quick thing, of course, you don't just have to use natural sound in a package report story. Sometimes Nat Sound will introduce a story the same way if you were to use a direct quote at the beginning. You may also include it in in the middle of a read or something if it isn't too distracting for the audience. And of course, the SOT rolls, sound on tape starts the story, and then it's followed by other video. So that means we're going straight from that direct quote into a read by the anchor or reporter. Nat sound rolls also happen if you want to introduce a story with that video audio cue and then start a read after to explain a little more about what happened. Okay. Now, just a reminder for Sunday, November 14th, you need to turn in your reporting writing project part 2. And on the 21st, you will turn in your broadcast writing project. If you have any questions, send me an email. I will see you guys in class. Thanks.